when 72-year-old Margaret walked into the conservatory clutching her yellowed sheet music. The judges whispered nursing home escapee until her arthritic hands touched the keys. Margaret's wrinkled fingers trembled as she smoothed the creased invitation against her kitchen table. The conservatory's gold emblem shimmered under the fluorescent light, a relic from 1956, when she'd been their youngest admitted student, outside her tiny apartment. Snow fell on the Bronx streets where she'd taught piano to neighborhood children for 50 years. The clock chimed 6 a.m. as she opened her ancient steamer trunk, releasing the scent of mothballs and forgotten dreams. Beneath stacks of beginner's method books lay her performance gloves. Still white despite their yellowed edges, she slipped them on, grimacing as the fabric stretched tight over her swollen knuckles. The bus ride downtown felt longer than it had 60 years ago. Students in crisp black performance were stared as she entered the marble lobby, her thrift store coat dripping snow onto the polished floor. "Excuse me, ma'am," a receptionist snapped. "The senior center tour group left hours ago." Margaret wordlessly placed her invitation on the counter, the paper trembling in her hand. Behind her, a teenage boy snorted. "Check her purse for denture cream." Laughter rippled through the line. The creeptionist's manicured nail tapped the date. This edition was scheduled for November 12, 1956. More giggles. Margaret's voice surprised even her. "I believe," she said softly, "your records will show I withdrew that day to care for my dying mother." She turned to face her smirking audience. "But the conservatory's bylaws state any deferred admission remains valid indefinitely." The room fell silent. A judge appeared, his tailored suit straining over his middle-aged paunch. "Fine," he sighed. "We'll hear you next, but keep it short, we have real talent waiting." As Margaret walked toward the practice rooms, she passed a polished Steinway. Without thinking, her gloved hand brushed the keys. A single pure note hung in the air. Somewhere in the back of the crowd, someone whispered, "That didn't sound like a nursing home hymn." The practice room smelled of disinfectant and rosin, its cracked soundproofing foam peeling like Margaret's own weathered skin. Through the thin walls, she heard the next performer, a Jutiliard-bound teenager playing Rachmaninoff with flawless technique but no soul. Like typing, her late husband would have said. When the door creaked open, Margaret didn't recognize the distinguished silver-haired man staring at her. Then she saw his hands, the long fingers that had once raced hers through Mozart duets. Daniel, her childhood rival, now the conservatory's dean, smirked at her faded gloves. "Little Maggie Dunning, I thought Alzheimer's had claimed you." The teenage boy from the lobby leaned in the doorway. "Dean Whitaker, you know this lady?" Daniel adjusted his platinum offlinks. "Know her, she was supposed to be the next Clara Schumann, until she ran home to play chopsticks for bratty kids." Margaret's gloves tightened around her sheet music as whispers spread through the hall. "They let anyone audition now," a mother told her daughter loudly. "Even Grandma's bridge club." Daniel plucked an imaginary piece of lint from his sleeve. "Well, Maggie, the floor is yours. Do try not to break a hip." As Margaret walked toward the stage, her orthopedic shoes squeaked on the polished wood. The audience tittered. She paused before the gleaming Hamburg Steinway, its surface so pristine she could see the reflection of her stooped frame. From the wings, Daniel's stage whispered, "Someone check if it's tuned to her hearing aid frequency." Laughter erupted. Margaret's swollen fingers hovered above the keys, the opening chords of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 floated out, hesitant at first, then stronger. The room stilled. By measure 12, the Juilliard teen's jaw dropped. Margaret's body straightened as muscle memory took over, her arthritic hands moving with grace they hadn't possessed in decades. Daniel's offlinks hit the floor with a clank. The Steinway's middle C stuck slightly as Margaret approached the climactic section. The imperfection unnoticed by anyone but her, she adjusted, her fingers instinctively compensating as she had taught generations of students to do. Behind her, Daniel's mocking voice cut through the music, "Someone get the piano tuner and the cardiologist." But the laughter died when Margaret reached the coda. Her left hand, gnarled from arthritis, executed runs that would challenge conservatory seniors. A woman in the front row, her designer handbag forgotten on her lap, pressed a tissue to her eyes. "Mama used to play this for me," she whispered. The Juilliard teen, his phone recording forgotten in his hand, mouthed "How?" as Margaret's right hand leapt an octave with impossible precision. When the final notes faded, the hall remained silent. Then came a single pair of slow, steady claps from the back. An elderly janitor leaned on his mop, tears cutting through the dust on his cheeks. "My wife. She loved that piece," he said. The room erupted. Students stood on chairs. Parents hugged strangers. Daniel stood frozen at the edge of the stage. His program crumpled in his fist. Margaret simply smoothed her dress and walked to the untuned practice piano in the corner. As the crowd buzzed around her, she began playing her mother's favorite lullaby, the same one she'd played at her mother's bedside 60 years ago. The room stilled again, this time with reverence. A conservatory trustee examined Margaret's yellowed invitation, then looked up sharply. "Madam, why did you wait until now?" Margaret's fingers didn't pause. The piano at the hospice wasn't worthy of Chopin. The conservatory's newsletter called it the miracle at Steinway Hall. By morning, Margaret's story had spread beyond the music world. Local news crews gathered outside her apartment, their cameras catching the peeling paint on her door as she left for her weekly church gig. Inside the conservatory, Daniel avoided the faculty lounge, where colleagues replayed the security footage of Margaret's performance. She plays like she's remembering, not performing, the head of Pianist studies marveled. That afternoon, Margaret received two unexpected visitors. First came the Juilliard teen, clutching his Rachmaninoff score like a life preserver. How did you make it sound like that? He stammered. Margaret pointed to his pristine sheet music. You're playing the notes. I'm playing my mother's last breath, my students' laughter, the sound of snow on our old roof. He left with red-rimmed eyes. The second visitor arrived at dusk. Daniel, holding a battered composition notebook. You kept this, Margaret said, recognizing her childhood sketches. I stole it, he admitted, when I heard you'd withdrawn. He placed it on her piano. I thought if I had your ideas, I could. His voice broke. Margaret opened to a page marked for Mama. Her fingers found the forgotten melody, one she'd composed the night before her mother's death. Daniel sank onto her threadbare sofa. I spent 60 years running from you, he whispered, only to learn I was racing a ghost. Outside, snow began to fall again. Somewhere in the city, a radio station played Margaret's viral performance. Listeners wrote in saying it made them remember lost loved ones, old dreams, better versions of themselves. But in apartment 3, there was only the soft creak of piano pedals and the sound of two old musicians finally making peace. The Carnegie Hall stage lights warmed Margaret's face as she adjusted the bench not too close. The way she taught her beginners, the sold-out crowd hushed when she lifted her hands. No longer gloved, scars and age spots told stories the program notes couldn't. She began with her mother's lullaby, the same one from the practice room. In the front row, Daniel sat between the janitor and the Juilliard teen, now his scholarship student. Camera phones lit up like fireflies when she transitioned into Chopin. But Margaret didn't notice. She was back in her childhood kitchen, her mother humming along. A reporter later asked why she refused lucrative recording deals. Music isn't meant to be captured, she said, only shared. The following Monday, Margaret returned to her Bronx apartment building. Mrs. Kowalski from Tuub greeted her with a plate of pierogies and a confession. I hid my piano for 30 years after my stroke. That weekend, 10 neighborhood seniors gathered in the community room, where a donated Steinway now stood. Margaret showed Mr. Chen how to play for Elise with his tremor. The Juilliard teen volunteered to teach basics, his flashy technique tempered by new wisdom. On Christmas Eve, the conservatory unveiled its new outreach program named for Margaret. Daniel donated his prized Betstain to her building. It deserves to be played, he said, not admired. The New York Times ran a photo of Margaret at the community piano, surrounded by students aged 8 to 88. The caption read, "The Prodigy who taught us late blossoms smell sweetest." But Margaret's favorite review came from her youngest pupil, who wrote in crayon, Mrs. D plays not with her hands but with her whole life. And in the margins of her mother's lullaby sheet music, Margaret finally wrote the words she'd been too young to compose in 1956 for those who think it's too late.